Amsterdam, 1841. The winter wind off the North Sea cuts through the uninsulated walls of a cheap attic. Inside, a 19-year-old boy named Heinrich sits shivering, coughing up blood, and facing an impossible deadline. His name is Heinrich Schliemann. Just weeks earlier, he had nearly drowned when a steamer bound for Venezuela capsized. He was caught in a violent storm off the Dutch coast. Now, washed ashore and stranded in a foreign city, he is working a grueling job as a lowly office messenger. He runs errands in the freezing rain for a few pennies a day. He is malnourished, exhausted, and the absolute definition of stuck. Amsterdam in the 1840s was a labyrinth of canals, towering merchant houses, and brutal inequality. While wealthy traders in heavy velvet coats negotiated the price of indigo and spices from the East Indies, the lower classes shoveled coal and hauled cargo through the sleet. Heinrich is at the absolute bottom of this social pyramid. Imagine the cobblestone streets outside his window. The clatter of horse hooves and the shouting of dock workers blend in a mix of Dutch, French, and English. Every sound he hears through the thin glass is a reminder of the barrier separating him from wealth and security. He realizes that language is not just an academic subject, it is an invisible key. Every word he cannot understand is a heavy door locked in his face. But this freezing, desperate teenager is not destined to die in this attic. Decades later, this exact same man would become a self-made millionaire, a legendary and controversial archaeologist. He stunned the world by unearthing the mythical city of Troy and a renowned polyglot. Listen for this word, polyglot. In historical English, a polyglot is a person who masters multiple languages. Schliemann eventually learned to speak, read, and write more than a dozen languages, including English, French, Russian, Arabic, and ancient Greek. But here in 1841, he knows none of them. He realizes a brutal truth. In the booming international trade hub of 19th century Europe, language is the only currency that matters. If he learns English and French, he can get a lucrative job as a trading clerk. If he does not, he will likely freeze to death in the slums. His physical survival depends on achieving fluency. Let us look closely at the word fluency. While many think fluency means absolute perfection, in historical and practical terms, it means the ability to speak or write smoothly and easily without stopping. Fluency is flow. It is the moment the water breaks through the dam. And Heinrich does not have years to break that dam. He has only weeks. Most of us have felt the sudden, burning desire to master a new skill. We buy the books, we download the applications, and we vow that this time will be different. For the first few days, we ride a wave of intense emotional energy. This is what we call motivation. In the beginning, Heinrich tries the traditional route. He stares at grammar books by candlelight. He tries to passively memorize long lists of vocabulary. But the exhaustion of his 15-hour workdays crushes him. His mind wanders. He forgets what he learned the day before. The effort feels completely futile. Listen for this word, futile. It means incapable of producing any useful result, or completely pointless. Historical accounts suggest that Schliemann quickly hit a wall. His burning motivation evaporated in the face of sheer physical and mental exhaustion. The biological reality of learning a language is that the human brain strongly resists holding onto new, seemingly irrelevant sounds. To your brain, foreign vocabulary is just extra noise. Unless you force the brain to care, it will discard the information to save energy. Heinrich faces a moment of profound stagnation. Stagnation is a state of not moving forward or improving, like water in a pond that refuses to flow. He is trapped in a paradox. He is too tired to learn, but if he does not learn, his exhausting life will never change. It is in this freezing room that Schliemann experiences a staggering revelation. A revelation is a surprising and previously unknown fact made known in a dramatic way. He stops relying on willpower. He understands a core truth, a phrase that you should repeat to yourself right now. Motivation fades, but systems remain. Try saying that out loud wherever you are. Motivation fades, but systems remain. Just as the city of Amsterdam operated on a strict, ruthless system of commerce, where ships arrived on schedule and ledgers were balanced with mechanical precision, Heinrich realizes his own brain needs an equally strict system of management. He decides he will build an inescapable mechanical process. He creates a daily habit framework that forces language into his mind, whether he is tired, hungry, or sick. He builds a framework that mirrors what modern linguists now call a 30-day accelerated learning protocol. He breaks down the monolithic, terrifying goal of fluency into highly specific, inescapable daily actions. Instead of studying for hours on a Sunday, he divides his time into tiny, daily blocks. Instead of passively reading, he begins actively pulling the language out of his mind. He does not know it yet, but he is inventing a prototype of spaced repetition, active recall, and shadowing. He is transforming his mind from a leaky bucket into a steel vault. By shifting his focus from the emotional high of motivation to the cold, reliable engine of a daily system. Schliemann goes from stuck to fluent. According to his later memoirs, he developed a method that allowed him to master a completely new language in just 6 weeks. Roughly a 30-day journey of intense, systematic immersion. But what exactly did he do in that attic? How did a poor clerk trick his own neurology into absorbing thousands of foreign words permanently? The answer begins with understanding the invisible architecture of human memory and the fatal flaw in how most people try to remember new information. To escape the slums, Heinrich first had to conquer the biological curve of forgetting. Let us quickly recap what we have uncovered in our journey so far. A desperate teenager in 1841 realizes that language is his only escape from poverty. When sheer motivation fails him, he discovers that building a mechanical daily system is the true key to fluency. He goes from futile stagnation to paving his way toward becoming a legendary polyglot. But the first pillar of his incredible learning system, the habit that stops new words from vanishing overnight, is something that modern science would not fully map out for another 40 years. It requires timing your memory right at the edge of failure. And that invisible biological clock is exactly what we will explore next. Imagine trying to carry water in your bare hands across a vast, dry desert. No matter how tightly you squeeze your fingers together, the water inevitably slips through the cracks. Every step you take, you lose a little more, until your hands are completely empty. Human memory is exactly like those hands, and new English vocabulary is the water. In the late 19th century, decades after Heinrich Schliemann fought for his survival in Amsterdam, another pioneer decided to measure exactly how fast this water leaks out of the human brain. His name was Hermann Ebbinghaus. What this solitary German psychologist discovered in the 1880s would permanently change our understanding of human learning, proving mathematically why most language learners fail and how a 30-day system can actually work. Picture a quiet, sunlit study at the University of Berlin in the year 1885. Outside, the German Empire is rapidly industrializing. Massive steel factories roar, and steam trains connect distant cities. But inside his study, Ebbinghaus is fixated on a different kind of machinery, the invisible, silent machinery of the human mind. The room smells of old paper, leather bindings, and pipe tobacco. On his heavy wooden desk sits a brass metronome, its metal pendulum swinging back and forth with a relentless, hypnotic rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Ebbinghaus sits alone, staring at a list of utterly meaningless words. W-I-D-Z-O-F K-A-F. He is not studying beautiful poetry or profound philosophy. He has intentionally created over 2,000 nonsense syllables. He acts as both the rigorous scientist and the exhausted laboratory rat in his own grueling experiment. Ebbinghaus wanted to isolate memory from meaning. He wanted to see how the biological brain discards raw, unfamiliar information. To a beginner, a new English word often feels exactly like one of Ebbinghaus's nonsense syllables. A random collection of sounds with no personal anchor. Over months of agonizing repetition, timing himself meticulously by the ticking of the metronome, he tracked his memory failures. He graphed his results on paper, mapping out a steep, terrifying downward slope. He had discovered what we now call the forgetting curve. Listen for this word, inevitable. It means certain to happen, something that cannot be avoided. Ebbinghaus proved mathematically that forgetting is inevitable. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is a ruthless biological feature of human neurology. His graphs demonstrated a shocking reality. Within just 24 hours of learning something new, the human brain automatically deletes roughly 70% of that information. Think back to Heinrich Schliemann freezing in Amsterdam 40 years earlier. When Schliemann first tried to read grammar books normally, he was fighting this exact biological curve. He was pouring water into a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. He failed initially because he expected a single exposure to a foreign word to immediately create fluency. But Hermann Ebbinghaus did not just discover the problem. He discovered the cure. As he studied his graphs, Ebbinghaus realized that if he reviewed the nonsense syllables at highly specific, mathematically calculated moments, the curve of forgetting suddenly flattened out. Notice the word, interval. In historical English, an interval is a period of time, or a pause between two events. Ebbinghaus found that if you wait the perfect interval, just before your brain is about to completely forget the word, and then review it, the memory becomes dramatically stronger. The next time, You can wait a little longer before reviewing it again. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14. The intervals expand. This brings us to the very first core habit of a successful 30-day language journey: spaced repetition. Motivation tells you to study vocabulary for 5 exhausting hours on a Sunday afternoon, only to forget it all by Wednesday. Spaced repetition, as a daily system, tells you to study for just 15 minutes every single day, reviewing specific words at expanding intervals. Say this phrase out loud wherever you are right now to practice your English rhythm. Timing is more important than time spent. Try saying it again, focusing on the flow. Timing is more important than time spent. It is not about how many total hours you stare at a page. It is about exactly when you interrupt the forgetting process. In the freezing attic in Amsterdam, Schliemann intuitively created a crude, spaced repetition system to save his own life. Historical records show he carried a small, worn notebook of vocabulary in his coat pocket. While running errands through the sleet, he did not wait until he got home to study. Every time he stood in a line at the post office or waited for a merchant at the crowded docks, he pulled out his notebook. He was constantly interrupting the forgetting curve. The environmental triggers of his brutal workday became the intervals of his spaced repetition. He forced his brain to accept that these foreign words were essential for survival. Listen for this word: retention. Retention is the continued possession, use, or control of something. In language learning, retention is your ability to keep a vocabulary word in your mind long after you first learned it. Spaced repetition guarantees retention. But there is a dangerous trap here, a trap that ruins the progress of millions of modern learners. You can look at a vocabulary word at the perfect interval, but if you look at it the wrong way, your brain will still reject it. Ebbinghaus stared at his lists, but merely looking at the letters did not cement them into his mind. Looking at a translated list of words creates a dangerous illusion of competence. You look at the English word merchant, you see the translation in your native language next to it, and you nod your head. You think, yes, I know that. But do you really know it? Or do you just recognize it? Recognition is a highly passive state. It requires almost zero neurological effort. Your brain simply confirms that it has seen the shape of the letters before. Fluency, on the other hand, requires creation under pressure. You cannot build a habit of speaking English automatically if your brain is constantly resting in a state of passive recognition. Let us briefly recap our journey. Ebbinghaus proved that forgetting is a steep, inevitable cliff. By utilizing spaced repetition, pacing our reviews at strategic intervals like Schliemann did on the docks, we flatten that cliff and achieve long-term retention. We stop carrying water in bare hands and finally build a watertight vessel. But building the vessel is only step 1. To actually use the language, to survive the fierce commerce of 19th century Amsterdam, or to thrive in a modern English conversation, you must learn how to summon the right word instantly. Schliemann did not just passively read his pocket notebook. To pull the language into his active memory, he performed a grueling mental exercise that felt exactly like heavy physical labor. It is a biological trigger that forces the brain to build thick, permanent neural pathways, utilizing the raw power of recall. What is this uncomfortable but highly effective habit? How do you force a word from the back of your mind to the tip of your tongue? That mechanism is exactly what we will uncover next. If reading a foreign word is like looking at a beautifully drawn map, speaking a language in real time is like walking that territory in the dark. To navigate without a guide, you must pave the roads inside your own mind. Amsterdam, 1842. Heinrich Schliemann is no longer just trying to survive the freezing winters. He is actively weaponizing his daily routine. Imagine him walking along the Singel, one of the city's widest and busiest canals. The smell of burning peat, damp wool, and roasted chestnuts fills the heavy, fog-laden air. Flat-bottomed barges slide through the dark water, loaded with timber, salted herring, and spices. Schliemann is carrying messages for his new employer, his leather boots slipping on the wet, uneven cobblestones. But his mind is completely detached from the bitter cold. He is performing a grueling, invisible exercise. His precious notebook of English vocabulary is deliberately hidden deep inside the pocket of his heavy wool coat. He absolutely refuses to look at it. Instead, as he watches a sailor tie a thick hemp rope to an iron mooring ring, he demands that his brain produce the English translation. He stares at the twisted rope. He knows he studied the word just yesterday. A profound, irritating mental silence follows. He feels a physical tension in his head. The English word is there, buried under deep layers of his native German and the local Dutch, but he cannot immediately reach it. He waits. He strains. He allows himself to feel the intense frustration. And then, finally, it snaps into his consciousness. Rope, knot, tie. Only then, after the mental labor is finished, does he reach into his freezing pocket and check his notebook to confirm he is correct. This agonizing mental reach is not a sign of failure. It is the exact biological mechanism required for true fluency. It is the second core habit of our 30-day journey, active recall. Listen for this word, recall. In historical English, to recall means to bring a fact, event, or situation back into your mind from memory. It is not just remembering, it is the active, deliberate, and often uncomfortable effort of retrieving information without any external help. When modern learners sit at a desk, they often engage in a highly superficial practice. Superficial means existing only on the surface, lacking deep meaning or thoroughness. You might read an English article and highlight the new words in bright yellow. You might stare at a list of translated phrases until you feel relaxed. You might watch a historical documentary with the subtitles turned on, nodding along because you understand the story. But this comfort is a dangerous illusion. Your brain is a highly efficient, energy-saving machine. If the answer is already visible on the page or on the screen, the brain will not waste precious calories building a permanent neural pathway. To force the brain to build a bridge, you must remove the paper. You must intentionally experience the discomfort of not knowing. Listen for this word, cognitive. Cognitive refers to the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding. Active recall is the ultimate cognitive stress test. Think of your memory as a dense, overgrown forest. A new English word is a small wooden cabin hidden deep inside those dark woods. Passive reading is like flying over the forest in a hot air balloon. You can see the cabin from above. Active recall is taking a machete and physically cutting a path through the thick brush, stepping over roots and rocks step by step until you reach the door. By the 30th day of your system, that jungle path has become a smoothly paved highway. Practice saying this short, repeatable phrase out loud wherever you are. The struggle is the signal. Try saying it again with a confident, steady rhythm. The struggle is the signal. The discomfort you feel when you cannot remember a word is not a block. It is the friction that creates the spark of memory. Schliemann's own memoirs suggest a relentless, almost obsessive drive to generate this friction. He would take long, solitary walks through the flat Dutch countryside, specifically to force himself to recall the vocabulary he had studied. He would look at a towering windmill, a plow horse, or a stormy gray sky, and refuse to keep walking until he could name them in English. He also pushed this habit into his writing. He began composing short, rudimentary essays in English. He would write a page about his life or the shipping industry, have it corrected by a native English speaker if he could find one. And then, crucially, he would memorize it by heart. He would stand in his unheated room, where the ink would sometimes freeze in his pen, and recite the entire essay to the empty walls. He was not just reading aloud. He was forcing the English language to originate from within his own mind. He transitioned his brain from being a passive warehouse of recognized words into an active factory of generated sentences. Listen for this word, retrieve. To retrieve is to get or bring something back from somewhere. When you practice active recall, you are training your brain's ability to retrieve words instantly under the pressure of conversation. In your own 30-day system, you must implement this immediately. When you review your spaced repetition flashcards, do not flip the card too quickly. When you cannot remember the English word, sit in the discomfort. Give yourself 10 full seconds of agonizing silence. Force your neurons to fire. Demand the answer from your memory before you allow your eyes to see the translation. Hide the subtitles on your videos. Look away from the textbook. That 10-second struggle is the exact moment fluency is physically built in the brain. Let us briefly recap our progress. We began by mastering the timeline of memory with spaced repetition, saving our words from the inevitable drop of the forgetting curve. Now, we have added the heavy, physical labor of active recall, forcing our brains to cut permanent neural pathways by retrieving words from the dark. Schliemann is no longer carrying water in bare hands. He has built a watertight vessel, and he is filling it with permanent vocabulary. But knowing a word silently in your mind and producing it confidently in the real world are two entirely different battles. When Schliemann first tried to speak his memorized English to British sailors at the bustling Amsterdam docks, he hit a devastating new wall. He knew the vocabulary perfectly, but his jaw, his tongue, and his breath simply could not move in the strange new rhythms of the English language. His accent was incredibly thick, and the sailors stared at him with blank, uncomprehending faces. To truly escape his poverty, he had to sound like he belonged in their world. He had to physically train the muscles of his face to dance to a foreign song. And the bizarre, noisy habit he invented to solve this problem is what we will explore next. Imagine possessing the keys to every door in a magnificent palace. but having hands too frozen to turn the locks. This was Heinrich Schliemann's new, agonizing nightmare. He had successfully forced hundreds of English words into his active memory. He had conquered the forgetting curve with his pocket notebook. And he had carved out neural pathways through the grueling mental labor of active recall. But when he approached the British sailors unloading cargo at the Amsterdam docks, disaster struck. He opened his mouth to speak his perfectly memorized sentences, and the sailors simply stared at him in utter confusion. They shook their heads and walked away. Schliemann quickly realized a brutal biological truth. Language is not just a cognitive exercise. It is an intensely physical one. Think of the human face. Your jaw, your lips, your tongue, and your vocal cords make up a complex biological machine controlled by over 100 different muscles. For 19 years, Schliemann's muscles had only ever performed the physical movements required for his native German, with a recent layer of local Dutch. When he tried to speak English, his brain knew the correct words, but his facial muscles were still dancing to a German rhythm. His vowels were too sharp, his consonants too hard. And the natural flow of the English sentence was completely destroyed. To a native speaker, an unfamiliar accent is not just a charming quirk. Heavily distorted speech forces the listener's brain to work too hard. In the ruthless society of 19th century commerce, businessmen did not have the patience to decode a foreigner's broken pronunciation. If you did not sound like them, you could not trade with them. The biological failure of his facial muscles resulted in instant social rejection. To solve this, Schliemann invented his third daily habit. It is a technique modern linguists highly recommend, though in 1842, it made Schliemann look like he was losing his mind. On Sunday mornings, while other exhausted clerks slept in, Schliemann walked to the English church in Amsterdam. He sat alone in the wooden pews, surrounded by the cold stone walls and the high, vaulted ceilings. He did not go to pray. He went to observe, to listen, and to steal the physical sounds of the English language. When the British reverend stood at the pulpit and began to preach, Schliemann locked his eyes on the man. But he did not just sit passively. He began to whisper. A fraction of a second after the reverend spoke a sentence, Schliemann repeated it into his own collar. Notice the word, mimic. To mimic is to closely copy the behavior, movements, or speech of another person. Schliemann was mimicking the preacher with terrifying intensity. If the preacher raised his voice, Schliemann raised his whisper. If the preacher paused for dramatic effect, Schliemann paused. He copied the breath, the emotion, and the exact placement of the tongue. He was completely bypassing his own internal translator and physically connecting his mouth to the sound of a native speaker. He was becoming a human echo. Today, this highly effective practice is known as shadowing. It is the third pillar of our 30-day system to fluency. Listen for this word, articulate. To articulate means to pronounce words clearly and distinctly. When you read a word silently, you do not practice how to articulate it. You only hear an idealized voice inside your head. Shadowing forces you to drag that word out into the physical world. It demands that you build new muscle memory. When you shadow a native speaker, you are physically stretching your vocal cords and training your tongue to hit the roof of your mouth in entirely new places. Historical accounts from Schliemann's own memoirs reveal just how obsessed he became with articulating correctly. Church was not enough. He needed more volume. Every single night in his tiny, uninsulated room, he would stand up and read his English texts out loud. He read with a booming, theatrical voice, deliberately forcing his mouth to exaggerate every single syllable until the physical movements felt natural. Listen for this word: intonation. Intonation is the rise and fall of your voice when you speak. It is the melody of a language. Every language has its own unique intonation. English often sounds like a rolling wave, with stressed words jumping up and unstressed words sinking down. If you use the correct words but the wrong intonation, native speakers will struggle to understand you. Schliemann was reading loudly to capture this exact melody. Practice saying this short phrase out loud right now, focusing entirely on the melody. Match the music, not just the words. Try it again, emphasizing the rhythm. Match the music, not just the words. In your own 30-day journey, shadowing must become a daily physical workout. Do not just watch English documentaries or listen to podcasts. Put your headphones on, choose a native speaker whose voice you like, and echo them. Speak out loud a split second after they do. Do not worry if you do not understand every single word they are saying. The goal here is not comprehension. The goal is physical conditioning. You are training the muscles of your face to accept the music of English. You will feel ridiculous. Your mouth will physically ache. Your tongue will stumble over complex consonant clusters. Embrace that ache. That physical fatigue is the exact sensation of fluency being forged in your muscles. Let us briefly recap our system so far. Our journey from stuck to fluent requires 3 overlapping gears. First, we use spaced repetition to defeat the biological decay of the forgetting curve. Second, we use active recall to carve permanent neural pathways by struggling to retrieve words from the dark. Third, we use shadowing to train our physical muscles, ensuring our intonation and articulation sound natural to native ears. Schliemann had built a miraculous engine for learning. He was absorbing English at an astonishing, historically documented rate, mastering the language in a mere 6 months of relentless effort. But there was a severe consequence to his loud, obsessive system. The walls of his Amsterdam boarding house were paper thin. Every night, the other tenants were subjected to the booming, relentless voice of a German teenager, screaming English essays into the dark. According to his memoirs, his landlords were furious. He was evicted from his lodgings. He had to find a new place to live, and then he was evicted again. His massive, monolithic goal of learning a language to escape poverty was threatening to destroy the very roof over his head. The sheer intensity of his daily system was pushing him toward physical and social burnout. He was doing too much, too loudly, all at once. If motivation fades and systems remain, what happens when the system itself becomes too heavy to carry? How do you prevent yourself from collapsing under the weight of a 30-day challenge? The answer is not to push harder. The answer is to shrink the world down. And the subtle art of microscopic goals is exactly what we will uncover next. The freezing streets of Amsterdam just got much colder. Heinrich Schliemann, the relentless linguistic machine, is standing on the wet cobblestones. with his few possessions packed into a battered wooden trunk. The heavy oak door of his boarding house slams shut behind him. He has just been thrown out onto the street. Listen for this word: evict. To evict means to legally force someone to leave the property where they are living. His landlords had finally lost their patience. The nightly booming of his voice, reciting long English essays into the early hours of the morning, was simply too much for the other tenants to endure. He is exhausted, embarrassed, and entirely alone. He manages to find a cheaper, darker room in a different district. But historical records tell us that a few weeks later, the exact same thing happens. He is evicted a second time. His daily system is working linguistically, but it is destroying him socially and physically. He is burning out. This is the exact moment where millions of modern language learners quit. You have likely experienced this dangerous tipping point. You start a new 30-day challenge with explosive enthusiasm. You decide to study for 2 hours every single day. You download 3 different applications, buy heavy grammar textbooks, and promise to watch only English documentaries. For the first 4 days, you feel like an absolute champion. But by day 7, the physical fatigue sets in. By day 10, real life interrupts. You have to work late, or you feel slightly sick. You miss 1 day. Then you miss 2. The psychological guilt crushes you. You look at the massive pile of textbooks on your desk, and you feel a wave of dread. You abandon the system entirely. Listen for this word: monolithic. A monolithic goal is something that is massive, rigid, and impossible to break apart, like a giant stone monument. Becoming fluent in English is a monolithic goal. It is terrifying to the human brain. When you look at a monolithic goal, your brain calculates the massive amount of biological energy required to achieve it. To protect you from exhaustion, your neurology immediately triggers a stress response. It creates procrastination. It begs you to stop. Schliemann realizes he cannot carry the weight of the entire English language every single night. He cannot rely on massive, hours-long sessions of explosive effort. To survive, he has to adapt his strategy. He must shrink the world down. He introduces the 4th habit of our 30-day system: micro goals. Instead of trying to master entire chapters in a single night, he slices his massive ambition into tiny, nearly invisible pieces. He begins to measure his progress not in exhausting hours, but in highly focused minutes. Listen for this word: increment. An increment is a small, specific amount by which something is increased or grows. Schliemann forces his learning into the tiny, unused increments of his brutal workday. If it takes him exactly 4 minutes to walk from the trading office to the post office, his micro goal is to actively recall just 3 English words during that specific walk. If he is waiting in the freezing rain for a merchant ship to dock, his micro goal is to silently shadow the conversation of the British sailors. For exactly 2 minutes. No more. Try saying this short, repeatable phrase out loud right now. Shrink the goal to save the habit. Say it again with absolute conviction. Shrink the goal to save the habit. A micro goal is a target so small that it is psychologically impossible to fail. If your goal is to study English for an hour, your brain will find a brilliant excuse to avoid it. But if your daily goal is to read exactly one paragraph of an English article before you drink your morning coffee, your brain offers zero resistance. The friction is completely gone. Listen for this word: sustainable. If a process is sustainable, it means it can be maintained at a steady rate for a long time without exhausting your energy. By shifting to micro goals, Schliemann made his intense system highly sustainable. He stopped yelling through the walls at midnight. He stopped getting evicted. He blended his learning seamlessly into his environment. He became a silent, highly efficient machine, processing tiny fragments of English data 100 times a day. There is a profound biological secret hidden inside micro goals. Every time you achieve a goal, no matter how small, your brain releases a tiny spike of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical of reward and motivation. When you set a monolithic goal, you withhold dopamine for months. You starve your brain of the reward. But when you set a micro goal, like recalling just 5 words while waiting for the bus, you give your brain a chemical reward instantly. You create an addiction to progress. A single short line. Consistency always defeats intensity. Let us pause and recap where we stand on this journey. To go from stuck to fluent, we cannot rely on the emotional wave of motivation. We must build a permanent system. We use spaced repetition to stop the forgetting curve. We use active recall to physically cut permanent neural pathways. We use shadowing to capture the unique melody of English. And when the system feels too heavy, we use micro goals to shrink the effort, ensuring we never miss a single day. With these 4 pillars supporting him, Schliemann's progress explodes. His English becomes spectacular. Within 6 months, he completely transforms his life. He secures a lucrative new job as a correspondent and bookkeeper for a major trading firm. His salary doubles. He is no longer starving in a freezing attic. He is wearing warm clothes, sitting at a solid oak desk, and writing formal business letters to wealthy merchants in London. He has conquered his poverty. But as he begins writing those high-stakes letters, a terrifying new flaw in his system is exposed. He is writing fast and he is speaking fast, but he is making subtle, dangerous errors. Because he has been learning largely alone, whispering in the rain and reciting to empty walls, he is repeating these errors hundreds of times a day. He is physically wiring mistakes deeply into his own brain. If you practice a broken sentence 50 times, you do not become fluent. You become permanently broken. How does a solitary learner stop themselves from cementing their own mistakes? What did Schliemann invent to clean the dirt out of his linguistic engine before it destroyed his hard-earned new career? The answer lies in a ruthless, painful habit of self-correction. And that psychological mirror is exactly what we will uncover next. Imagine building a magnificent, lightning-fast ship, only to realize you have installed the steering wheel completely backward. The faster you sail, the further you get from your true destination. Heinrich Schliemann is sitting at a heavy oak desk in the warm, well-lit offices of B.H. Schroeder and Company, a prominent Amsterdam trading firm. It is a massive step up from his freezing attic. He is breathing the air of success, dipping his quill into black ink, and writing complex business correspondence to wealthy merchants in London. His fluency is undeniable, The words flow from his mind to the paper without hesitation. But fluency has a dark side. Speed does not guarantee accuracy. Because he had built his language system in isolation, shouting into the dark and whispering in the rain, he had inadvertently trained himself to make mistakes. If you use the wrong verb tense every single day for 30 days, your brain does not know it is wrong. It only knows that it is easy to retrieve. Listen for this word, fossilization. In historical science, fossilization is the process where a living thing turns to solid stone over millions of years. In language learning, fossilization is the dangerous process where your repeated grammatical mistakes harden into permanent mental habits. Schliemann realized his errors were fossilizing. His active recall and his shadowing were working too well. He was aggressively memorizing his own broken English. If he continued, he would sound like a fast, confident fool, and the London merchants would eventually stop trusting him with their money. While modern historians often debate the strict accuracy and timelines of Schliemann's highly dramatized memoirs, evidence suggests he was brutally honest about his need for correction. He knew he could not fix what he could not see. He needed a mirror. He needed someone to catch his mistakes before he locked them into his memory. He introduces the fifth crucial habit of our 30-day journey, the error journal. Schliemann began attending the English church, not just to shadow the Reverend, but to seek out educated native speakers. He would write his short English essays and deliberately hand them over to an English teacher or a willing merchant. He asked them to aggressively correct every single mistake, every wrong preposition, every unnatural phrase. Listen for this word, audit. An audit is an official, systematic inspection or review. Schliemann was performing a brutal audit of his own mind. Once his essay was covered in corrections, he did not just glance at it and throw it away. He recorded those specific mistakes in a dedicated notebook. This was his error journal. Then, and only then, did he apply his active recall and shadowing to the newly corrected text. He was cleaning the engine before he pressed the accelerator. A single short line. Practice does not make perfect. Try saying this phrase out loud, focusing on the rhythm. Practice makes permanent, not perfect. Say it again. Practice makes permanent, not perfect. If you practice a mistake, you make the mistake permanent. In your own 30-day system, an error journal is your ultimate defense against fossilization. When you speak to a language partner, or when you use software to check your English writing, do not just accept the correction and move on. Write the mistake down on the left side of a notebook and write the corrected, natural English phrase on the right side. Then, feed that specific correction directly into your spaced repetition system. Force yourself to use active recall on the phrases you get wrong the most. This habit requires something that the human ego violently resists. It requires you to actively seek out the pain of being wrong. Listen for this word, vulnerable. To be vulnerable is to be open to emotional or physical attack. In a psychological sense, it means willingly exposing your weaknesses to others. Most learners want to feel smart. We want to read the words we already know. We want to have conversations where we feel safe and comfortable. But comfort is the enemy of fluency. Schliemann had to be deeply vulnerable. He had to hand his essays to strangers and watch them cross out his hard work with red ink. He had to face the reality that, despite his grueling daily system, his output was still flawed. But by embracing that vulnerability, he systematically eradicated his errors. He transformed his broken, heavily accented English into the polished, professional language of international commerce. He secured his position at the trading firm, and he began to amass the initial wealth that would eventually fund his legendary archaeological expeditions. Let us review the machine we have built so far. We defeat the forgetting curve with spaced repetition. We forge neural pathways with the deep struggle of active recall. We train our facial muscles to hit the right notes through shadowing. We prevent burnout by shrinking our tasks into invisible micro-goals. And we prevent fossilization by auditing our mistakes in an error journal. This 5-part system took Heinrich Schliemann from a starving, freezing teenager in the slums of Amsterdam to a highly paid international correspondent in less than a year. He had conquered English, he had conquered French, but human ambition is a dangerous, expanding fire. Schliemann looked at his newfound success and decided it was not enough. He set his sights on the most difficult, isolated, and lucrative market in Europe, the Russian Empire. If he could learn Russian, he could dominate the indigo trade and become unimaginably wealthy. But there was a massive problem. In 1840s Amsterdam, finding a native Russian speaker was almost impossible. There were no Russian teachers. There were no proper Russian dictionaries available in the local Dutch shops. He managed to find a single, old, badly translated grammar book and a poor translation of a classic novel. How do you apply a language learning system when you are completely isolated? How do you practice speaking a language when there is literally no one in your entire city who can understand you? To solve this impossible puzzle, Schliemann was forced to invent the final, most powerful habit of his entire life. A habit that would push his mind to the absolute limit. What was this bizarre technique? We will uncover his Russian experiment next. Imagine trying to learn a highly complex secret code, but the only people who know how to decipher it live more than 1,000 miles away. For Heinrich Schliemann, the Russian language was the ultimate locked vault, and he was determined to break inside. Amsterdam, 1844. Schliemann is now a respected correspondent at his trading firm. He sits at his oak desk, surrounded by the organized chaos of international commerce. He notices a massive, glowing gap in the market. The firm trades heavily in indigo, a highly valuable, deep blue dye that stains the hands of the dock workers and brings in staggering profits. The richest buyers of this indigo are located in the Russian Empire. But there is a severe bottleneck. No one in the Amsterdam office can read, write, or speak a single word of Russian. When heavy wax-sealed letters arrive from St. Petersburg, they pile up on the desks, completely unread. The firm has to hire a costly, slow, external translator just to understand the basic orders. Schliemann, with his razor-sharp ambition, sees his golden opportunity. If he can master Russian, he will become entirely irreplaceable. He will secure a monopoly on his own value. Listen for this word, monopoly. In historical economics, a monopoly is the exclusive control over a specific trade, service, or commodity. By becoming the only Russian-speaking clerk in the city, Schliemann would hold a personal monopoly over the firm's most lucrative market. But there is a massive geographical problem. In 1844, Amsterdam is devoid of Russian teachers. There is no one to speak with. Historical accounts tell us that Schliemann scoured the city and managed to hunt down only 3 items: a battered old Russian grammar book, a heavy lexicon dictionary, and a poorly translated copy of a classic French novel called The Adventures of Telemachus. He has no native speaker to audit his error journal. He has absolutely no one to listen to for his shadowing practice. He is entirely isolated. The Cyrillic alphabet looks like alien geometry to his German eyes. He knows he can use active recall to force the dictionary into his memory. He knows he can use spaced repetition to defeat the biological decay of the forgetting curve. But language is a deeply social mechanism. The human brain evolved to communicate with living, breathing people. To achieve true fluency, the smooth, uninterrupted flow of spoken thought, you cannot just memorize isolated words. You need a target. You need an audience. You need a reason to string words together under pressure. What Schliemann does next is widely considered one of the most brilliant, eccentric learning experiments in history. Listen for this word: eccentric. Eccentric means unconventional, slightly strange, or highly unusual. Schliemann walks out into the damp streets of Amsterdam and hires a poor, unemployed local man. He pays the man 4 francs a week. The man's only job is to come to Schliemann's cramped room, sit in a wooden chair, stare at the ambitious clerk, and listen. The hired man does not speak a single syllable of Russian. He cannot comprehend a single sentence Schliemann is saying. Listen for this word: comprehend. To comprehend is to grasp mentally, or to fully understand something. The hired listener was completely uncomprehending. Every single evening, Schliemann stands in front of this utterly confused stranger and passionately recounts the epic, mythical stories of Telemachus in loud, broken Russian. He gestures wildly. He acts out the narrative. He forces himself to explain the plot, to describe the characters, and to maintain an unbroken stream of speech. He is practicing the 6th and final core habit of our 30-day journey: storytelling practice. Why would a brilliant language learner pay a man who cannot understand him? Because Schliemann understood a profound biological truth. The human nervous system reacts completely differently when there is another face in the room. When you speak out loud to a person, even an uncomprehending one, your heart rate elevates slightly. You feel a mild, necessary psychological pressure. This pressure forces your brain to stop translating individual words slowly and start connecting them into a flowing narrative. Storytelling practice is the bridge between isolated flashcards and real-world conversation. Millions of modern learners fail because they never build this bridge. They have thousands of words saved in their spaced repetition applications. They use active recall perfectly. But if you ask them, "What did you do today?" they completely freeze. They have isolated bricks, but they have never practiced building a wall. Storytelling forces you to build the wall in real time. Practice saying this short phrase out loud right now, using a firm, confident voice. Speak to the wall if you must. Try it again, emphasizing the rhythm. Speak to the wall if you must. In your own 30-day system, you must graduate from single sentences to continuous narratives. You do not need a perfect native speaker sitting next to you. You do not even need someone who understands English. You just need to practice the physical and mental act of outputting a story. Describe your morning routine to your pet. Explain a historical event to your reflection in the bathroom mirror. Record a 5-minute voice memo on your phone describing a movie you just watched. The goal is flow, not perfection. Let us pause and look at the magnificent machine we have constructed together. We stop the inevitable forgetting curve with spaced repetition. We forge deep neural pathways with the agonizing friction of active recall. We train our facial muscles and capture the melody of English through shadowing. We keep our daily habit alive by shrinking our tasks into invisible micro-goals. We fix our fossilized mistakes by auditing our speech in an error journal. And finally, we tie it all together by forcing our brain to construct continuous narratives through storytelling practice. This is the complete system. This is how you manufacture fluency out of thin air without relying on fading motivation. But Schliemann's eccentric storytelling practice had a very familiar, disruptive consequence. His passionate, booming Russian recitations through the paper-thin walls drove his new landlords to the brink of madness. He was evicted yet again. He was chased out of his room by furious neighbors for the 3rd time in his life. But this time, it did not matter. Schliemann was entirely unbothered by the eviction. He had built his monopoly. He was ready. He marched into the trading firm and announced that he could write to St. Petersburg. He drafted his first major business letter in Russian. Will his bizarre, isolated storytelling method actually hold up against real, wealthy Russian merchants? What happens when a learner who has only ever spoken to an uncomprehending stranger is suddenly thrown into the brutal reality of an international market? The ultimate test of his system, and the explosive wealth it generated, is what we will witness next. Imagine a heavy, wax-sealed envelope traveling by horse-drawn carriage over 1,000 miles of freezing, snow-covered roads across northern Europe. Inside this envelope is the entire future of Heinrich Schliemann. The year is 1844. This envelope contains the first Russian business letter ever sent. By the Amsterdam trading firm of B.H. Schroeder and Company, addressed to one of the wealthiest merchant houses in St. Petersburg. Schliemann had written it himself, utilizing his bizarre storytelling practice. He handed the letter to his employers. Now the dreadful waiting begins. Will Russian merchants laugh at his grammar? Will they be insulted by a clumsy foreigner? Will the entire indigo trade deal collapse because he used the wrong verb ending? Several weeks later, the reply finally arrives in Amsterdam. Schliemann's employers break the seal. The letter is translated. The Russian merchants are not insulted. They are absolutely thrilled. The grammar is not flawless, but the message is entirely clear, highly respectful, and incredibly persuasive. Listen for this word, authentic. Authentic means genuine, real, or of undisputed origin. Schliemann's Russian was not textbook perfect, but it was authentic enough to build a massive bridge of trust. The Russian merchants had never received a letter in their native tongue from a Dutch trading firm. This simple act of linguistic respect gave Schliemann's firm a massive advantage. They immediately secured the lucrative indigo contract. This moment reveals a profound truth about the ultimate goal of your 30-day system. The final test of your language journey is not a written exam in a quiet classroom. It is the terrifying, chaotic reality of the real world. Listen for this word, threshold. A threshold is a piece of wood or stone beneath a door, representing entry to a new phase of life. When you complete your daily habits, when you use spaced repetition, active recall, and daily shadowing, you are walking right up to the threshold of fluency. But to cross that threshold, you must hit the send button. You must speak to the stranger. Accept your first real-world conversation will be messy. Millions of modern learners stand at this threshold and freeze. They are terrified of making a mistake. They tell themselves they need to study for just one more month before they are ready to speak. Schliemann did not wait for perfection. His daily storytelling practice, even shouting at a stranger, trained his brain to maintain communication flow. He trusted the neurological pathways. Practice saying this short phrase out loud right now, with calm confidence. Do not wait for perfect. Wait for understood. Communication is not about flawlessly executing grammar rules. It is about successfully transferring an idea from your mind into another's. Listen for this word, deploy. Listen for this word, deploy. To deploy means to bring into effective action. Schliemann deployed his Russian exactly when it mattered most. Consequences were explosive. When the partners at B.H. Schroeder & Company realized what their young clerk had done, they were stunned. Schliemann was no longer a replaceable messenger running errands in the sleet. He possessed an absolute monopoly on the firm's most valuable market. In early 1846, they made a historic decision. They did not just give him a raise. They promoted him, packed his bags, and sent the 24-year-old Schliemann directly to St. Petersburg to serve as their permanent, primary representative in the Russian Empire. Picture this breathtaking transformation. Just 5 years earlier, he was coughing up blood in an unheated attic, starving, and nearly completely broken by poverty. Now he is wearing a tailored coat, riding in a carriage through the spectacular, snow-dusted streets of the Russian capital. He is walking past the towering columns of the Winter Palace, conducting high-level negotiations with the most powerful merchants in the empire. He had literally spoken his new reality into existence. Listen for this word, lucrative. Lucrative means producing a great deal of profit or wealth. Lucrative means producing great profit or wealth. Schliemann's mastery of Russian allowed him to dominate the highly lucrative trade of indigo and saltpeter. By 1847, he was so successful that he registered as an independent merchant. He began building his own massive trading empire. He would eventually expand his business during the California Gold Rush and the Crimean War, utilizing his ever-growing network of languages to outmaneuver his competitors across the globe. He had achieved the ultimate dream of any desperate, ambitious immigrant. He was a self-made millionaire, a respected polyglot, and completely financially secure. Our 30-day system of language habits had worked perfectly. It had saved his life. Let us briefly recap the immense ground we have covered. The journey from stuck to fluent requires a mechanical system that operates regardless of motivation. Spaced repetition captures vocabulary. Active recall forces the brain to retrieve it. Shadowing trains physical muscles. Micro-goals prevent the crushing weight of burnout. The error journal stops mistakes from fossilizing. And storytelling practice bridges the gap between the classroom and the real world. If this were a traditional success story, it would end here. The poor boy became rich. The language learner achieved fluency. He lived happily ever after. But Heinrich Schliemann was not a traditional man, and the human brain, once it learns how to rapidly decode the world, rarely wants to stop. By his mid-40s, Schliemann looked at his massive mountain of wealth and felt entirely empty. He realized he had spent his entire adult life using his language system purely for money. But deep in his memory, buried under decades of business ledgers and international trade deals, was a childhood dream. A dream of ancient mythical heroes, towering walls, and lost civilizations. He decides to abandon his lucrative business entirely. He decides to use his massive wealth and his formidable language machine for something far more dangerous than the indigo trade. He sets his sights on a language that no living human being speaks natively. He sets his sights on the ancient text of Homer's Iliad. Can a system built for 19th century commerce be weaponized to resurrect the dead past? What happens when a millionaire polyglot decides to physically dig up a myth? The final, legendary chapter of Schliemann's life is what we will unearth next. Imagine possessing a mountain of gold, only to realize the one thing you truly desire is buried beneath thousands of years of dirt. It is 1864. Heinrich Schliemann is 42 years old and staggeringly wealthy. He sits alone in a grand, quiet room, watching the heavy snow of St. Petersburg fall outside his window. He has conquered the indigo trade, survived the volatile markets of the Crimean War, and built an absolute empire of currency. But the thick financial ledgers on his heavy mahogany desk no longer excite him. The desperate hunger that kept him alive in that freezing Amsterdam attic 20 years earlier is completely gone. He has reached the peak of the mountain, and he is profoundly bored. Listen for this word: liquidate. To liquidate means to convert assets, businesses, or property into cash. Schliemann makes a shocking, monumental decision. He decides to liquidate his massive trading empire. He packs away the tailored business suits and turns his back on the international commerce that saved his life. He remembers a picture from a history book his father gave him when he was a small boy in Germany. A drawing of the magnificent, burning walls of Troy. The legendary city of King Priam, famously besieged by the ancient Greeks in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. In the mid-19th century, the established academic world firmly believed Troy was merely a beautiful fairy tale. Listen for this word: mythology. Mythology is a collection of ancient stories belonging to a particular culture, usually involving gods, monsters, or superhuman heroes. Historians in London and Berlin insisted that the Trojan War was pure mythology, a beautiful fiction invented by a blind poet. But Schliemann, a man who had successfully bent reality to his will using rigid daily systems, refuses to accept this. He believes the Iliad is not just a poem. He believes it is a literal geographical map, and he intends to use his millions to dig it up. But to read this map, he must decode a language that has not been spoken natively for over 2,000 years. He must learn ancient Greek. He resurrects the exact same mechanical system he invented in his youth. Listen for this word: resurrect. To resurrect means to bring something back to life, or to revive a practice that has been long forgotten. Schliemann resurrects his language machine, but this time, the target is entirely different. How do you use active recall and shadowing for a dead language? You cannot shadow a native speaker in a church, and you cannot hire an uncomprehending stranger to listen to your stories. Instead, Schliemann shadows the text itself. He first masters modern Greek in a matter of weeks, using his spaced repetition and micro-goals. Then, he plunges into the ancient dialect. He reads the Iliad out loud. He applies his grueling active recall by forcing his brain to translate the ancient hexameter poetry into modern thought without looking at a dictionary. He applies his micro-goals to break the massive, intimidating epic into manageable, daily stanzas. He treats the dead words on the page as if Homer himself is standing in the room, speaking directly to him. According to his own writings, this relentless, daily system allowed him to master ancient Greek in just a few short months. Listen for this word: metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that describes an object or action in a way that isn't literally true, but helps explain an idea. The academic establishment viewed Homer's descriptions of the landscape as poetic metaphors. But because Schliemann had practiced deep, immersive storytelling practice, he felt the language differently. He interpreted the ancient words as literal surveying instructions. Homer described the hot and cold springs of Troy, the specific distance from the sea, and the layout of the grand gates. Schliemann used his deep fluency to map these physical details in his mind. Practice saying this short phrase out loud right now, focusing on a calm, steady delivery. Language is a map to the hidden world. Armed with this ancient linguistic map, Schliemann travels to the Ottoman Empire. He arrives at a dusty, sun-baked hill in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. The dry wind of the Aegean Sea whips across the barren landscape. The smell of wild thyme and baked earth fills the air. The academic establishment laughs at him. They call him a foolish, wealthy amateur chasing ghosts. Listen for this word: amateur. An amateur is a person who engages in a pursuit on an unpaid basis, often lacking formal or professional training. They tell the amateur to go home. But Schliemann does not listen to the critics. He is listening to Homer. Let us look closely at the magnificent machine we have built together on this journey. The entire language system, the spaced repetition that conquers the forgetting curve, the active recall that cuts deep neural pathways, the shadowing that builds physical muscle memory, the micro-goals that sustain the daily habit, the error journal that aggressively audits mistakes, and the storytelling practice that bridges the gap to reality. For Schliemann, these 6 habits were no longer just tools for survival. They were no longer just tools for wealth. They had become tools for historical discovery. He used this exact 30-day framework to survive poverty in Amsterdam, to build an empire in St. Petersburg, and now to challenge the established history of the world. He hires hundreds of local laborers. He stands on the hill of Hisarlik with his ancient Greek text in his hand. He reads Homer's precise descriptions of the landscape, looks at the dirt, and points to the ground. he orders the men to dig. Days turn into weeks. The heat is unbearable. The sharp sound of metal pickaxes hitting hard, baked stone echoes across the valley. The dirt yields nothing but useless rocks and endless dust. The world is watching, waiting for the arrogant millionaire to fail, waiting for the myth to remain a myth. Will his language system actually lead him to the greatest archaeological discovery of the century? Or will he destroy his legacy and his fortune in the dirt? The stunning climax of his massive gamble and the final lesson for your own fluency journey is exactly what we will unearth next. The harsh, blinding sun of the Aegean summer beats down on the dry earth. For weeks, Heinrich Schliemann has stood on the hill of Hissarlik, watching his hired workers cut massive trenches into the ancient dirt. They have dug through layers of forgotten settlements, moving thousands of tons of soil. The academic world continues to mock him from afar, calling his massive excavation a fool's errand. Then, on a hot morning in May 1873, the sharp swing of a metal pickaxe strikes something solid. It does not sound like baked clay. It does not sound like hollow stone. It is a dull, heavy, metallic clink. Schliemann stops the workers. His heart pounds against his ribs. According to his widely published but often dramatized accounts, he spots a glimmer of gold buried deep in the trench wall. Fearing his workers might steal the priceless artifacts, he abruptly calls for a break, sending them away to rest. With a small knife, his hands trembling, he begins to dig the dirt away himself. Listen for this word: excavate. To excavate means to carefully remove earth that is covering very old objects buried in the ground, in order to discover things about the past. What he excavates that morning stuns the entire world. He pulls golden diadems, intricate earrings, heavy silver vases, and copper shields from the crushed dirt. He adorns his young Greek wife, Sophia, in the magnificent ancient jewelry and photographs her. He proudly announces to the globe that he has discovered Priam's treasure. He claims he has physically unearthed the mythical city of Troy. The man who started his life freezing and starving in an Amsterdam attic had used his rigid mechanical language system to bend history to his will. Because he had mastered ancient Greek with the same ruthless efficiency he used for Russian, English, and French, he had read Homer not as poetry, but as a literal map. Now, modern archaeology is incredibly critical of Schliemann. Listen for this word: controversial. If something is controversial, it causes a great deal of public disagreement or heated debate. Schliemann is a highly controversial figure today. Evidence suggests that in his aggressive, impatient rush to find the Troy of the Iliad, he used dynamite and careless digging techniques. He actually dug completely through the physical layer of the Homeric era, accidentally destroying the very city he was looking for, and found a much older civilization beneath it. Historians debate the exact origins of the treasure he claimed belonged to King Priam. But despite his destructive methods and his massive ego, the core truth remains undeniable. His linguistic obsession forced the academic world to rewrite the history books. He proved that the myths of the ancient world were built on a foundation of reality. Listen for this word: legacy. A legacy is something handed down from an ancestor or a predecessor from the past. It is the permanent mark you leave on the world. Schliemann's legacy is a testament to the sheer, unstoppable power of a daily system. He did not achieve fluency because he was born a genius. He did not become a millionaire because he was lucky. He achieved these massive, impossible goals because he completely abandoned the fragile emotion of motivation. He built a machine, and that is exactly what you must do now. Let us stand at the threshold of your own journey and look at the machine you now possess. You begin in the freezing attic of your mind, surrounded by the overwhelming noise of a foreign language. To survive, you must first stop the inevitable decay of your own memory. You use spaced repetition. You interrupt the forgetting curve by reviewing your vocabulary at mathematically perfect intervals. You stop carrying water in your bare hands and finally build a watertight vessel. But a vessel is useless if you cannot pour the water out. So, you employ the grueling, physical labor of active recall. You refuse to look at the translated answers. You sit in the agonizing, silent friction of your own mind, forcing the English words into the light, cutting permanent neural pathways through the dark forest of your brain. When you know the words, you must learn the music. You engage in daily shadowing. You listen to native speakers, and you physically echo their voices, training the complex muscles of your face, jaw, and tongue to hit the natural, flowing rhythm of English. When the burden of this massive goal becomes too heavy, and you feel the terrifying urge to quit, you shrink your world. You use micro-goals. You study for 3 minutes while waiting for the bus. You recall 5 words while making your morning coffee. You create a daily habit so microscopically small that it is psychologically impossible to fail. As you get faster, you defend yourself against the danger of permanent mistakes. You embrace vulnerability and build an error journal. You actively seek out corrections, auditing your speech and writing, and feeding your failures directly back into your spaced repetition system. You clean the engine before you press the accelerator. And finally, to cross the ultimate threshold into real-world fluency, you practice storytelling. You speak out loud to the empty room, to the mirror, or to an uncomprehending stranger. You force your brain to string isolated words into a continuous, unbroken narrative, preparing yourself for the chaotic reality of human conversation. Practice saying this short phrase out loud right now, with absolute confidence. My system is stronger than my struggle. Try saying it one last time, cementing it in your mind. My system is stronger than my struggle. This is the 30-day journey. It is not a magic trick. It is not a shortcut. It is a biological and neurological reconstruction of your own mind. If a desperate, starving teenager in the 1840s could use these exact mechanisms to escape the slums, dominate international commerce, and physically dig up the mythical city of Troy, imagine what you can do with the technology and access you possess today. The language is waiting for you. The map is in your hands. It is time to start digging.